Hello everybody, you have tuned in to Eric Jose on Making a Murderer on YouTube. I cover virtually any aspect of making a murderer. I go over the evidence, the documents, the photos. So if you like, stay tuned, and in the future I'll have many more videos besides the one you're about to see. Hello everybody, we're here today to talk about what corruption looks like. This is going to be having to do with a case in Wisconsin, very nearby. Well, it's in Wisconsin, it's in Kenosha. And basically this is going to be like textbook 101, what it looks like when law enforcement band together and cover something up. It's a textbook example, I'm telling you. This case is kind of really sad. It's really sad what happened, and you can't help but ask yourself in the end, when you find out all the particulars about it, you can't help but wonder to yourself, what were those law enforcement officers thinking and doing? Because number one, it didn't go down the way they said. And so why were they telling a story? Why were they so eager to tell a story that wasn't the truth? And why did this young man end up dead in the way and with the circumstances in which that it happened, which are very, very sketchy, to be perfectly honest. And part of the reason why I say that is, you'll see in this video, is about the print, from the muzzle print that was left on Michael Bell's basically temple, on his right temple, which is the opposite of the way that, you know, the way that the cops say it went down. Anyways, the muzzle print there proves that he was shot on that side and the gun was pressed to his head. The officers say that they shot from the other side, and it's crazy. But the forensics ended up coming out in this case and proving that the officers were basically telling a story that was not true. And eventually, you know, Michael Bell's father received a settlement from the state and stuff, but and he went on to do some other things. But I'm going to post a link, obviously, to the full video. I'm going to be showing you kind of an excerpt from it here tonight to kind of show you just like exactly what it looks like when officers are covering something up. But I'm going to post the link to the full video down below for everybody who wants to go and see it. It's going to give you a little bit of background on Michael Bell himself. You know, he's basically a young man. He was 21 years old. He was actually just beginning to start a business. He like most people at 21 was having a little bit of, you know, to do with alcohol, and was, you know, obviously learning and figuring out how to moderate and you know, just come to grips and learn how to responsibly consume alcohol, obviously. So there's, you know, there's that, but by no means was he up to anything that warranted the kind of action you see in this video and what you hear about. I mean, you know, I don't see how they honestly believed that this kid was as much of a danger as they try to say he was, especially when the explanations come out as to how one officer's holster got moved from the side to like the front of his belt. You know, especially when all that stuff starts getting explained, and it's obvious that this was all there for the original investigators to figure out. But when it all starts getting explained that it was actually the side view mirror of the car that they had slammed Michael up against when he was trying to run into his house, the mirror had pulled on this officer's gun, and this officer was saying that Michael was grabbing his gun. And the other officer, and this is where it gets tricky. This is where it gets extremely tricky, because the witnesses, which Michael's mother and sister were standing 10 feet away, being blocked by an officer that wouldn't let them get any closer. And that's when they say Officer Gonzalez ran up and was on Michael's right side, and fired and put the gun up against Michael's head and fired a shot. The Kenosha police department ends up claiming a completely different thing. So that's what this video is going to be showing you. It's basically just, like I said, anatomy of what it looks like when, you know, law enforcement officers band together to cover something up. And it usually doesn't just stay at the law enforcement level. It kind of goes up higher. You know, other people tend to co-sign and sign off that nothing happened until so much proof comes out that it can't be denied anymore. And then suddenly they decide that they want to try and go ahead and offer compensation and do those sort of things, right? But for those who always say, oh, how can you believe law enforcement could do these things? How could you believe that a law enforcement officer would do this or that or plant or blah, 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 blah. Okay, this is how, people. This right here, what you're about to see. This is how you can believe it, because you're going to be able to see it right here with your own eyes. So let's get to it.
It was November 9th, 2004. Michael Bell was parked in front of his house. Officer Eric Strausbaugh ordered Michael to take a breath test, even though the officer's dash cam had revealed no erratic driving. When Michael refused, things quickly escalated. And after being kicked and tased, Michael tried to run up the family driveway. During the struggle, Officer Eric Widener kept Michael's mother and sister at bay. Lieutenant David Kruger was holding Michael from behind in a bear hug. Officer Strausbaugh began screaming that Michael had taken the officer's gun. This led a fourth officer, Albert Gonzalez, to run up to Michael with his gun drawn, and at the command of Lieutenant Kruger, to shoot Michael in the head. The Kenosha police report stated that Michael was shot because he posed a lethal threat to the four officers. But the evidence told a different story. No fingerprints or DNA from Michael Bell were found on the gun or holster. And according to four eyewitnesses, as shown in this recreation photo, Officer Gonzalez stood between Michael and Officer Strausbaugh, while Lieutenant Kruger held Michael from behind. This should have allowed Gonzalez to confirm that Michael did not have Strausbaugh's gun. But even though there was no forensic evidence that Michael Bell grabbed Strausbaugh's gun or holster, it appeared that someone or something had indeed come into violent contact with the weapon. So much so that the officer's holster had been yanked out of position from his hip to the front of his body, causing his terrified screams. But if Michael Bell didn't grab the gun, who or what did? 8 years later, a private investigation would reach a startling conclusion.
Brad, Tammy, this is an affidavit from a former Kenosha police detective. It includes his theory of what happened that night in November of 2004. He concludes a car part led to a fatal police shooting.
Michael was right here.
Michael Bell stands where his son died, in the driveway of the family's Kenosha home.
I kind of consider this kind of like a holy spot, you know. I mean, this is where your son lost his life, right here at this place.
But Bell isn't here to mourn. He's here to demonstrate what he and his private investigators believe happened in the moments leading to the death of Michael E. Bell.
I have no problem with the fact that the officer might have made a mistake. That is part of his line of duty.
Well, that alleged mistake revolves around the driver's side mirror. Fox 6 obtained an affidavit from retired Kenosha detective Russell Beckman. Beckman, who spent nearly 30 years with the Kenosha police, states any reasonably competent investigator committed to objectivity and the truth would have been able to determine Officer Strausbaugh's holstered handgun was caught and captured by the driver's side mirror. He states, the officers involved, and more than likely the supervising and investigating police officials, chose not to tell the truth.
The report noted that the mirror had been at the very center of the struggle, leaving it broken and hanging by a cable. It also noted that the KPD virtually ignored the mirror in its findings. In November of 2004, the prospect of a very human but fatal error loomed over the Kenosha Police Department. But rather than leave no stone unturned, its investigation was concluded in less than 3 days. The district attorney said that Michael was shot because the officers believed they were in imminent danger of death and lethal force was necessary. Not addressed was the lack of Michael Bell's fingerprints or DNA on the weapon. The mirror was not mentioned as a possible culprit. The bullet that killed Michael Bell was not analyzed. and multiple witnesses had not been contacted for follow-up interviews. But the officers were awarded citations for meritorious service. The case was closed, but searing questions remained.
Okay, so you see here so far what has happened. That they, by the 4 witnesses, 2 of which were Michael's mom and sister, who were standing just like 10 feet away, being detained by one officer, being held back, but basically 10 feet away, and 2 others, because there's 4 total, they say, that saw exactly what happened, where Gonzalez came up on Michael's right side and put the gun to his head. Okay, that's where the muzzle print was. So that for the muzzle print to be there means the gun had to be there. Okay, so that's where we're at. So that's where the forensics of this also backs up the witnesses' accounts. Okay, here's the rub. I mean, here's what they're getting at with that. Is that if that's the case, then Officer Gonzalez was running up on the side where he would clearly be able to see Michael's hands and Officer Kruger's gun. He would be able to see that. Running up on that side, he would be able to see that clearly. And he would be able to notice, oh, he's not touching that gun, because there was no DNA or fingerprints on that gun. There was no DNA or fingerprints from Michael Bell on the gun. Nothing on it. It got, like I said, and like they proved here with the private investigator and stuff, it got moved in the struggle when they broke the driver's side mirror of that car that they, all slammed up against when they were, detaining him, or, basically. And once they got him, in a bear hug and pinned, where his legs were pinned in between the officer and the fender of the car, they start panicking. And one officer runs up and shoots him pretty much kind of execution style. Now, what happens here, what we're going to see happening here now, is where the officers come back with their version of events. It's going to come into play because of the way that the angle of the shot through Michael's head is going to come into play. But the fact of the matter is that these cops are so bold in trying to cover up their mistake and cover up whatever it was that they were doing here, that they try to claim that they shot in the opposite direction from the left side of Michael's head to the right side, and like through the windshield. Windshield was not broken. There's nothing. The windshield was untouched. The evidence doesn't support that, but this is what so we're going to get into right now, and you're going to see just how far, how much that these officers are willing to go to back up this cover-up lie that they're telling. No matter, almost no matter what proof comes out that proves them to be lying, they continue to maintain that they told the truth. It's amazing to watch. So, also one other thing I wanted to point out. Did you see that little bit back right there just before I came in and started talking about awards? That the officers involved with this were given awards when the family was feeling kind of outraged over what happened and the lack of investigation and how quickly it was just like swept under the rug. And those officers were given awards. Sound familiar? Does that sound familiar to anything? A couple of investigators in another case who bullied a poor 16-year-old kid who was highly suggestible into a confession, who got awards for their stellar work. Yeah. What is it with Wisconsin rewarding just bad behavior in my mind? The way that Fassbender and Wiegert extracted that horrendous train wreck of a story from Brendan that changed and had no consistency whatsoever. Anyways, that's what that struck me when I saw that about these officers getting awards. I just thought I'd point that out. So let's move on to the rest.
The Bell family sued the city of Kenosha for the wrongful death of Michael Bell, citing a rush to judgment and a cover-up. The family contended that because Officer Gonzalez stood between Michael and Officer Strausbaugh, the police should have been able to confirm that Michael did not have Strausbaugh's gun. But instead, Lieutenant Kruger ordered Gonzalez to shoot, and he did. The Bells further contended that the KPD knew it had made a tragic mistake and then initiated a cover-up. The Kenosha police presented an entirely different story, stating that Officer Gonzalez was standing in front of the car. From there, he couldn't confirm whether or not Michael Bell had control of Strausbaugh's weapon, but he clearly heard Strausbaugh's terrified screams. The KPD added that Gonzalez purposely angled his weapon toward the windshield to avoid shooting the other officers. The Bell family and their attorneys responded with the evidence. First, that 4 civilian eyewitnesses said Gonzalez stood to Michael's right and between Michael and Strausbaugh. Second, that the autopsy showed that Michael had been shot on the right side of his head with an exit wound on the back left. Third, the blood on the car was on the hood but not the windshield, consistent with Gonzalez firing from the right side of Michael, not the left. And fourth, that the shell casing ejected from the right side of Gonzalez's weapon was found in the grass and leaves on the right side of the car, also consistent with Gonzalez firing from Michael's right. The Kenosha officers were confronted with these discrepancies during their depositions.
Were you able to see the gun pressed against the head of Michael Bell?
Yes.
Would you please stand up in the position that you had Michael Bell at the time the shot was fired?
I was standing behind him and I had my arms around his upper shoulders.
All right. And again, Michael Bell was leaning in what posture at the time of the shot?
He was in front of me and he was more or less like this, leaning over.
And Officer, we'll strike that. What side of the head was Michael Bell shot in?
Left side.
And you could see that because Officer Gonzalez was to your left?
Yes, sir.
And you saw Officer Gonzalez with his gun out, pointed towards Michael Bell's head?
Yes.
And you saw the muzzle of the gun placed against Michael Bell's head?
Yes.
And is this the first time that you've given any testimony under oath concerning this case?
Yes.
And you understand the significance of giving testimony under oath in all matters, including this one?
Yes, sir.
All right. The autopsy finding, Roman numeral 1H, reads as follows. Trajectory of wound path through head, body in anatomic position, right to left, front to back, and slightly downwards. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, sir, you did.
All right. Is it still your testimony under oath that Officer Gonzalez was standing in front of the Nissan at the time he put a bullet into Michael Bell's head?
Yes, it is.
Is it still your testimony under oath that Officer Gonzalez's gun was pointing at the windshield at the time he put a bullet through Michael Bell's head?
Yes.
Is it still your testimony under oath that Officer Gonzalez had his gun pressed against the left side of Michael Bell's head when he shot him?
Yes.
And is it still your testimony that Officer Gonzalez was never on the right side of Michael Bell at the time he pulled the trigger?
That's correct.
Caught in a crucial contradiction, the KPD scrambled to reconcile its claim that Gonzalez stood on the left, while the forensic evidence showed that Michael Bell was shot on the right. 8 months later, in December of 2007, KPD presented its answer in the form of a reenactment video. Officers Widener, Kruger, Strausbaugh, and Gonzalez reenacted their actions for the cameras. According to the Kenosha Police Department, Michael Bell had now grabbed Officer Strausbaugh's gun while craning his neck to expose the right side of his head to Gonzalez's weapon. They claimed that this solved the riddle, placing Gonzalez on the left while shooting Michael on the right. But the video did not exonerate the officers. Instead, it had the opposite effect, illustrating a series of glaring contradictions and further suggesting a cover-up. The video depicts Officer Gonzalez firing his weapon point blank into Michael Bell, with Lieutenant Kruger standing directly in the line of fire. This contradicted the KPD's earlier statements that Gonzalez angled his weapon toward the windshield, precisely to avoid shooting the other officers. The medical examiner observed that according to the video, Kruger would have been shot by the bullet passing through Michael Bell's head, and he would have been sprayed with blood and brain tissue, neither of which occurred. The medical examiner further noted that according to the KPD video, the shell casing would have been thrown to the left of the car, but it was actually found on the right side of the car. With their defense in free fall, the Kenosha Police Department introduced a third version of the event and a second video to address just one of the discrepancies, the location of the shell casing. The KPD now claimed that Officer Gonzalez held his gun sideways, gangster style, when he shot Michael Bell. They asserted that this would account for the shell casing being thrown to the right side of the car. But even this 11th hour change in story was rejected by the medical examiner. The autopsy showed that Michael Bell had sustained an imprint or muzzle stamp from the gun firing against his right temple. The examiner noted that in order for the muzzle stamp on Michael's head to match the KPD's version of the event, that is, with Gonzalez firing from the front and holding his weapon sideways, Michael Bell would have to have been in an exceedingly distorted position, held from behind, with his head turned around 180 degrees and tilted upward. The medical examiner called this scenario forensically impossible. In 2010, the Bell family settled their civil lawsuit against the city of Kenosha for nearly $2 million. But their victory was hollow, because questions of what really happened remain open. Also open is the possibility of criminal charges against Kenosha officials, including perjury, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice.
If I can't get this done, then nobody's going to be able to get this done, because I have the education and the resources and the commitment to get this done. So I recognize that there's a problem here. And
all right, so at the end there you saw Michael Bell's father, Michael Bell Sr., who I will tell you right now, you should go down below into the info there and take a look at the video, the full video that talks about Michael Bell Jr., talks about what Michael Bell Sr. went on to do, after he got his settlement and stuff, and what he went on to do in helping to create new legislation that eventually stops the police from policing themselves when there is a fatal shooting. If there is a fatal police shooting now, the agency that committed the shooting is no longer the investigating agency. It has to be an outside agency now, basically. So that's what that does, is at least gives some kind of measure of insurance that the investigation into the shooting will be objective, and that if there is any wrongdoing, that it won't be just swept under the rug. Obviously, we know that it can get pretty tight in the law enforcement brotherhood. So I would imagine it might have to be something pretty heinous still for it to really get another agency to go against fellow law enforcement officers. But I'm sure if it was heinous enough, you'll definitely probably get a reaction. But at least this gives a little bit more credibility to the investigation than having the actual agency by which the shooting was committed to investigate it. Obviously, they're going to want to cut themselves loose and free of liability. So, I mean, that just... Anyway, so it goes through what Michael Bell went through, so, and what he went on to do and stuff like that. So I think it's worth a look for anybody who's interested. So that will be in the info below the video here. As I said, the main reason for making this is so that people could see, because there are some people out there that think, how could you think that law enforcement could do such things? There's no way law enforcement could do such things. How could you think that honest officers could do such things? Look, just because you slap a hunk of metal on somebody's chest doesn't make them freaking Gandhi. It doesn't make them like somehow beyond human frailty. They have the same human frailties as the rest of us. Now, are they trained to control their emotions and handle themselves in situations and things like that that help them in their job and stuff? Yes, of course. But they are still subject to the same human frailties that all of us are. They worry about money. They worry about their kids. They worry about their wives and loved ones. They worry about all those things. All those things matter to them just as much as they matter to all the rest of the people out here in the wide world. So they are not above any human frailty. And they can do like what you saw here in this video. It can happen. So I just wanted to illustrate it here today so that people could see just what exactly it looks like when law enforcement does decide to try to cover their behind, as it were. Alright, so I hope everybody enjoyed this video. I hope it was educational. I hope you got to see now exactly what it looks like, how it can happen. And like I said, what do you think now after looking at those officers and their reenactment of how they tried to change the situation? Instead of the gun facing slightly towards the windshield, now it's like facing off in the direction where it could have went through Officer Kruger and possibly hit the officer behind him who was holding back the mom and the sister. I mean, their new scenario basically put a lot more people in danger, right? And they thought that was a good idea. And then don't even get me started on Gangsta Style. Holy crap. When I saw that, I was just like going, I didn't just see that. I didn't really just see that. I backed it up. I'm like, that must have been a delusion. I must have been like, my joking mind must have somehow inserted that. I must be like falling asleep or something. Went back. No. Gangsta Style. And then you saw what the forensics proved about that, how it made that ridiculous. Basically, his head would have had to been to have attached to his neck for it to have worked that way. Yeah, basically, yeah. Would have had to reorganize Michael Bell's anatomy to where the top of his head was actually on top of his neck. Anyway. So the forensics in this case totally blow the whole story out of the water. I mean, you got to look at it, really. Think about it. Do you think these cops actually went in? I mean, watching this, I don't think a single one of them ever actually went in and looked at the forensics on this. Either they didn't go look, or maybe they tried to go look, but they weren't able to understand the papers, or there was just so much paperwork to go through that they weren't able to find the paperwork that explained like the direction of the bullet and the muzzle, and like maybe they just weren't diligent enough to go through and find it. But the fact is that they kept they kept reenacting things and changing how it happened, expecting that, oh, okay, everybody's just going to believe us because we're police officers and it was all going to go away. But because they weren't understanding the forensics involved, they kept putting their foot deeper in, the muck. So, and I don't know. I mean, it's absolutely bizarre to me. But I will give a tip of my hat to the scientists and the forensic scientists in this case. I mean, they weren't gonna go along with any crap. They were just gonna test the evidence, and the science is the science, and they didn't care about any other agendas. basically, they were just true they were loyal to their science. And I gotta say, that is refreshing. I mean, my hat's off to them, because they were honest in this case. Justice was really able to be done. Because, like I said, Michael Bell Sr. was able to go on and get law made that really actually makes it harder now for officers to kill somebody in the line of duty. You know, well, at least it makes them think twice before pulling the trigger, because they now know it won't just be their department investigating it. They know that it will be another department with people that are unknowns to them that will be coming in to investigate it, and that at least creates enough of a deterrent that if they aren't absolutely certainly frightened for their life, then they will think twice about pulling that trigger. So that's actually kind of the good thing that comes out of this, you know. But yeah, it's a tragedy nonetheless. And as I said before, the awards, I mean, those are the awards. I mean, these officers are lying. They're totally being dishonest, and they're getting awards. I mean, what is it with Wisconsin? I don't know. Anyways, that's about it, folks, for this video. It's a sad and unfortunate thing that happened to Michael Bell, and my heart goes out to his family and his father. But I mean, his father really used this whole experience to try and help other people, to prevent this, or in the hopes of preventing this from what happened to him from happening to you or other people out there. So he, you know, because of his own pain from losing his son, it motivated him to go out there and do something to help protect other citizens in Wisconsin, and that is very noble of him, and my hat's off to him as well. So if you haven't already, please hit subscribe, and we'll see ya.